Hey guys, welcome to Grad Coach TV, where we demystify and simplify the oftentimes confusing world of academic research. My name's David, and today I'm chatting to one of our trusted coaches, Amy, about 5 top tips to keep in mind when you're tackling your literature review. This discussion is based on one of our many articles on the Grad Coach blog. So, if you'd like to find out more about the literature review chapter, head over to gradcoach.com/blog. Also, if you're looking for a helping hand with your dissertation, thesis, or research project, be sure to check out our one-on-one private coaching service, where you can work with one of our friendly coaches that will be with you step by step through the research journey. For more information and to book a free consultation, head over to gradcoach.com. So, Amy, welcome to the Coachcast. It's really great to have you here.
Hi, David. Thank you.
Amy, we're going to jump right into it. And today we're talking about 5 tips for your literature review. And the first one is to develop a rough outline or framework for your lit review before you start writing. Why is this such a good idea?
I love this topic, David. I love talking about literature reviews because it's like putting a puzzle together. So when you're putting a puzzle together, you don't just throw the pieces into a pile in the middle. You first look at the picture on the box. So you want to have some kind of a frame. You want to identify the important elements of the overall picture. So before you start writing, you want to have some kind of a loose structure or outline. Otherwise, it'll end up being a jumbled mess. So you might begin with an introduction, like you do with all your chapters, where you provide an overall outline for the contents and purpose of the chapter. Then you might identify some important jargon words specialized to your field that maybe your readers won't be familiar with, so they'll be able to follow along. And then you get into your heart of your review. So you might organize your topics, your headings in a few different ways. If you're looking at how a phenomenon has changed over time or how an organization has changed over time, you might organize your review chronologically. Or you might organize thematically if you want to make sure to cover all of the main topics of your study. That's probably the most common way to organize your literature review. If you happen to be offering a unique take on your methods, you might compare and contrast the methods section of your research in your review, and so you might organize it methodologically. And then you want to make sure to talk about the gaps in the literature. So the whole point of the literature review is you're saying, here's what the literature says, here's what it doesn't say, and this is how my study is going to address those gaps. So that's really essential that you focus on the gaps. And then you might end with some sort of closing where you explain the logic behind how you connected those dots, the logic behind how you connect the pieces of the puzzle.
That's really helpful, Amy. And remember, it's important to have this structure because it helps you frame the process of your lit review, but don't feel chained to it. It's going to change. It's going to develop as you're reading, as you're writing. So don't feel you have to stick to it because you've set it up, but it's there to help you get started and moving forward. So our second tip is to look at previous literature reviews. Amy, what's the benefit of taking a look at what previously people have written about your topic?
Yeah, so you have this daunting task, right? The literature review. You have 50, 100 references. It's easy to get sort of lost in this and overwhelmed. So rather than allow yourself to get overwhelmed, don't reinvent the wheel. Take a look at your university online library. Take a look at some of the published dissertations and thesis related somehow to your topic. And then look at their literature review. How did they organize it? What topics did they cover? And that will give you a good sense of all of the norms related to your field, of all the things you want to make sure that you cover in your literature review. And then you can start to go into some of the academic journals. You use Google Scholar, so you literally type in your topic plus literature review, or any sort of public open access database like EBSCO, like ProQuest. And then you want to make sure you sort of identify what kind of a literature review it is you're looking at. Is it a traditional narrative literature review? Is it an SLR? An SLR is a systematic literature review, and that is kind of a more comprehensive literature review that has a bit more detailed exclusion and inclusion criteria. Or is it a quantitative meta-analysis?
I think that's a really key point, Amy, because each of those literature review types are going to be written in different ways, and you're not necessarily going to use those each in your own way. Another important thing to keep in mind is be careful of how old that lit review is you're basing your thinking on. If it's too old, you're going to be running into issues that it's not up to date. So a great thing to look at is take a look at literature probably within the last 3 to 5 years. That's sort of the ideal. And then you really want to make sure that you're checking if there's not more recent research. So a great way to do that is to head over to Google Scholar, type in the name of that literature review, and then see who cited it since it's been published. And that can be a really good way to get right up to date with what's happening currently in your field.
Yes, recent research is where you want to be. 3 to 5 years, perfect rule. Caveat to that is when you're citing seminal authors, when you're talking about a phenomenon that's been well established in the research, you want to go back to the first person who created that sort of concept, particularly in your methods section. If you're talking about qualitative methodology and you're trying to defend why you chose qualitative methodology, you want to make it very clear that you're very familiar with those seminal authors, which may have, developed that in the 1960s. So that would be one caveat to making sure that your research is 3 to 5 years recent.
That is an excellent catch. We definitely want to be citing the relevant authors, both seminal and recent work. And that's really what makes for a rich literature review, is that you're covering what has been done and identifying those gaps that exist. So our third tip that's really important is to write first and then think about editing and cleaning things up. Amy, why do we want to just jump into the writing?
So one of the biggest mistakes I see students make is thinking everything has to be perfect right out of the gate. The problem with that way of thinking is that it actually prevents you from making progress. Writing is a form of thinking. So when you're first starting to write your literature review, you're sort of brainstorming, you're getting your ideas out. And that's perfectly okay. It should feel messy. If it feels messy, you're doing it right. By the time that you're done, you're going to have many versions of your paper. And you don't know what your supervisors, your committee is going to have to say. They might say, okay, you need to add this in, you need to take this out, and they will do this multiple times. So don't pre-edit yourself. The most important thing is that you get out of your head and onto the page.
Another point to really keep in mind is don't feel locked into writing from A to Z. Writing is an iterative process. You can move from A to C to B to D. And really the point there is we want to avoid writer's block, because there's always going to be a section in your lit review where things get tough. And so when you hit that wall, when you're feeling a bit unsure, take a break, move to a different section of your lit review. And that's why we developed that outline that I suggested in tip 1.
Yes, and you said that word iterative. So you'll hear this word a lot associated with the writing process. So iterative just means there's going to be many iterations. The writing is back and forth. So you're not going to start at A and end at Z. It's going to be all over the place. But one day you're going to wake up and it's going to be complete.
I think that's such a key point, because perfection is the enemy of complete. I know from my own experience, I spent so much time working on my PhD, on my lit review, and still to this day, I want to go back and make changes. But it was accepted. I got my degree, so obviously it was good enough. But in my eyes at the time, it was a mess and not perfect. So definitely feel perfectly comfortable to submit that draft and get that feedback.
Yes, that's, I think, a pretty common feeling. I mean, the thing is, you're never really going to be done. Years later, you will go back and you'll see that one word, that one phrase that you could have done a little bit better. But at some point, you just have to walk away and submit.
Exactly, because you want that degree. You don't want to be stuck doing this project forever. So our fourth tip is to insert your citations as you write. Amy, why do we need to be doing this as we go rather than right at the end?
So your literature review should be full of citations. You want to convey to your readers, to your committee, that you have done extensive research on these topics and that you've essentially become an expert on these topics. So you will have so many references. It's a helpful tip to embed those citations as you go, either as narrative or in-text citations. So I've seen students who will make a claim and they'll leave a parentheses blank with the thinking that they'll circle back later and insert that citation.
That is such a good point, and it's something that I know I myself did while I was doing my research. I may or may not have done that and lost references, and then had to spend more than a few days going back through all the papers to find that specific reference. So definitely it's important to make that claim, support it with reference, rather than to make the claim without any support and then to have to go find it. Because remember, with the lit review, we're presenting what previous literature has done. And so it's less about your perspective and rather what the literature says, and then a synthesis of that.
Right. And the last thing you want to have to do before, after you've done all these hours of work and just before you submit, is to have to go back and remember where you found the research and to have to put it in there correctly. That's a real drag. So as you go, make sure that you're keeping in mind the format style that you're using, get the spacing, the punctuation, and how to write the author's name in there. So you don't have to worry about that later on. And I think Mendeley is a reference manager you might consider using. Mendeley will actually do that for you. So that might be something to consider to help you organize all these many, I mean, you might have 200 references, by the time you're done. So that will really help you organize all your references and have that in one spot.
So I can't agree more. Mendeley is a life changer. I think there's no excuse not to be using a reference manager. You're cutting out a lot of stress and a lot of frustration, because the reference manager can handle formatting your references for you, assuming you put the data in correctly. And it can also help with in-text citations, building up your bibliography, and some of them can even catalog your research for you from the internet through plugins. So it's super worthwhile going into. And if you're interested in it, we do have videos on both Mendeley and Zotero, two free programs that are great reference management softwares. So our fifth and final tip is to get feedback. Ask a friend, a non-expert, to take a look at your work and give you honest feedback. Amy, what's the benefit of taking this approach?
Right. So I think the benefit is at some point you stop seeing the words. You've been staring at these words, staring at these pages for so many hours. I think it gets to the point where it's difficult to even objectively read it anymore. So you grab a friend, grab an outside person to come in and read it, and they will be able to, okay, wasn't following you here. And that will help you to know, okay, I need to go back to that point and expand and clarify a little bit.
Yeah, you really are going to find at some point you're shoulders deep in the topic. You're not going to be aware where you're assuming knowledge on behalf of your reader. And so getting that outside perspective from anyone from an unrelated field is super helpful. I know in my own experience helping students with their literature review, often enough, I'm able to make really helpful comments and suggestions based solely on the fact that I'm not a specialist in the field. So I figure out when there's jargon or an argument that's not well set up because I can't follow it. And that's a great tip that you can get from a friend or anyone else.
Yeah, because you're at the point that you're so enmeshed in the topic and you really have become kind of an expert that you assume that everyone is following your logic, but which is not necessarily the case. So having someone who is unattached to your work come in and read it and even have them summarize it back to you, you will hear it. You'll hear very quickly, okay, this is not what I meant here, or this is not clear, specifically with words and terms, which I think sometimes you're writing and you think you've introduced it already in that chapter, but you haven't. So I see this quite a bit. So this is why it's helpful to have someone from the outside come in and read it and even summarize it back to you.
It's definitely worth not being shy about getting that feedback. Feedback's only going to help you improve. And to be honest, every person has a unique perspective in life and specific experiences. And so often enough, they might come up with really unique insights that you wouldn't have come up with. They might even help you to identify a gap in the research that you hadn't seen. So definitely, whenever you can, reach out, get that feedback. It's definitely going to be helpful. Amy, thanks so much for joining us. It's been really great. You've been super helpful. Can't wait to see you next time.
Absolutely, David.
All right, so that pretty much wraps up this episode of Grad Coach TV. Remember, if you're looking for more information about the literature review chapter, be sure to check out our blog at gradcoach.com/blog. There you can also get access to our free dissertation and thesis writing mini course, which gives you all the information you need to get started on your research journey. Also, if you're looking for a helping hand with your dissertation, thesis, or research project, be sure to check out our one-on-one private coaching service, where you can work with one of our friendly coaches, just like Amy. For more information and to book a free consultation, head over to gradcoach.com. All right, so that's it for today's episode. Until next time, good luck.